And we'll just say that I am recording on Podbean at the same time as we are recording on Mind Shifters on Blog Talk. So I've listened to it, and it is a little bit metallic sounding, but it's picking it up pretty good. And there's also on the website, I have created a separate page that if you go to the website, whyagain.org, and over under Kaboris, you can, I'm trying to do it at the same time I'm talking, my apologies. So whyagain.org, and then there's a menu over in the far right that says Kaboris, and underneath it, it'll say Enlightenment, and that's just about the book, but then there's one that says Enlightenment Study. And if you go to that page, it tells you about the offering that we're making of buying the book for $26 as a donation, and we will pay the shipping and handling. And then underneath it is all of the archives. I'm uploading the second hour to our YouTube channel, putting the links there on this Enlightenment Study page and the dates, and then also the link if you want to listen to it on Podbean. So you can make both of those available to yourself, and let us know what you think. And Michael will be with us here in just a second, and he will continue. Today is day 5 of the Enlightenment series that we're working on. And the Enlightenment is the book, what has been published so far out of the Kaboris manuscript. And so we'll get more into the history and some of the information there. When Michael gets on, I'm actually going to read a comment that was in the chat room yesterday, and we didn't have time to get to it. So I will read it after he gets on here. And Michael, if you're on, you're not showing up on the switchboard yet. Well, I'm going to step away for just 1 second and see if he's having trouble getting logged in. Just 1 moment. Welcome, Michael. And we did have a comment yesterday in the chat room, so if we could read that and address it. And
Great.
we already
Let's
have
go
a
for
hand.
it.
Okay. They had said, you inspired me to explore the Lamsa months ago. I actually started with Erico. Is there in existence the Lamsa translations that were not just the 1,500 changes, but the full 10,000 differences?
No, unfortunately there are not. And what's being referred to is that George Lamsa did his translation, the Aramaic. George Lamsa was a man who was born in the Middle East. His native language was Aramaic, so he didn't have to do all the unlearning and the relearning from the Greek. And so this is back in 40s, 50s, and the good quote-unquote Christians were threatening to kill him because he did not conform with the Greek translation that was called the King James Version. And so he said that the changes should have numbered somewhere between 10 and 12,000 being published today as the Greek translations. And he only made about 1,600 out of those 10 to 12,000 changes that he thought he could survive with the threats to his life that were coming. So George Lamsa's translation is limited. However, he and Rocco Erico worked together for years, and if you want a more full understanding, go to anything that they've published. There's Gospel Light, More Light on the Gospel, Old Testament Light, Idioms of the Bible Explained, The Lord's Prayer in Aramaic. There's a whole series of things that both Rocco Erico, and Rocco's website is Noora, which means light, NOOHRA.com. Or it might be .org, one or the other. And you can find Lamsa's work, Lamsa's translations and such there. And there are lots of videos on YouTube as well. They're really very enjoyable and very insightful. So that would be my offering in that direction. And then I have a question that came in via text, and the text reads, quick question. Can you give me an example of sin versus evil? If sin means you missed the mark, and evil means you missed the whole board target altogether, and an example of how one would know they've missed the mark and how they've missed the target altogether, and what would happen to one if they sinned, quote unquote. So let's take the last piece first. So I think in the Western world, it's understood as some kind of a theological threat. If you do something this evil, bad, this nasty thing that the Greeks put forward as sin, if you do that, then God's going to get you. He'll kill you, literally, and then you get to burn somewhere for eternity. But in Aramaic, they did say the wages of sin is death. If you understand that the word sin means off the mark, it's actually an archery term. Both words, sin and evil, are archery terms. If you fired at the bullseye and you missed the bullseye, the scorekeeper would yell sin. If you missed the target altogether, the scorekeeper would yell evil. So you're off the target altogether. So an example of that would be, let's speak it in something that's a little more immediate than normal. Let's speak it in terms of health. There are certain energetic influences that your structure is made for. Let's take it down to the area of nutrition. For instance, every cell in your structure has as its fuel source glucose, sugar. In fact, many physicians, they're discovering and calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes. And they're calling it type 3 diabetes because there is no insulin in the brain, and insulin is required to get sugar into the cell. And so people who have this type 3 diabetes tend to become progressively poorer and poorer in mental faculties because the sugar can't get into the cell. However, there is a solution to that, and that is that there's an oil called MCT oil powder. Actually, the oil is not very tasty, but the oil powder is really quite good. And MCT oil powder is a short-chain fatty acid that the cells can use without insulin. And we saw a turnaround, for instance, with Jeannie's dad, who had Alzheimer's, and he was getting to the point where, our favorite thing to do together was play dominoes, and he was getting to the point where we had to give him instructions for every step of the way. His Alzheimer's was getting pretty serious, and I was doing research and came across the MCT oil powder, and we started to give him that. And within less than 2 weeks, he was beating us again at dominoes. So the sugar or insulin doesn't need to get the sugar into the brain. So the natural thing would be you put food in your body, the body converts that food to a usable energy source called sugar. So that would be on target. Now, what the food industry has done, recognizing that, and that we have an attraction to sweet things because there's an unconscious knowing that sugar is a source of energy. And that's what causes the whole structure to function. So when something tastes sweet, what the structure interprets that as is, there's nutrition here. If you're familiar with a vegetable garden, there's a thing called a Brix meter. And a Brix meter tells you how much sugar there is in, let's say, a fruit or vegetable. And if you pick something at the peak of ripeness, the Brix number will be high. It will be loaded with sugar. And that's when it's ripe and ready to eat. Take in, your body digests all of those nutrients and coenzymes and such that come with the food, and then give your cells the glucose that they need. However, what they did is they took all of the nutrients away, and refined the sugar down to where it's just this pure poison. Literally, sugar is a poison if you put it in the body. It destroys the body. So sugar, isolated from nutrients in food, would be, in the Aramaic sense, in the context we're speaking, would be sin. And when they said the wages of sin is death, if you do sugar over a period of time, you'll notice that the person who does a lot of sugar ends up with diabetes, ends up with foot sores, ends up, my last memory of my grandmother was she was a sugar addict, and they took off her toes on one foot, then the other. Then they cut her half of her foot off, then at the ankles, and by the time she finally passed, she had both legs cut off up to the knees because of her taking that poison in. Long-term result, wage of sin is death. So that would be sin in the Aramaic sense, just meaning it's an energy that's off target. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. It just isn't on target for the structure it's going into. Now, in that, again, let's take that in the next step now. Let's go to evil. What would being off target altogether be? So I sit down and I lace my my soup with arsenic. Miss the target altogether, and within minutes I'm dead. That would be what that would look like. So I hope that fits and makes sense for your question, and I'm glad you're asking it. I'm glad you're hanging out with us on the show. And we'll make sure, I know you're off in the Bahamas. I did some worksheets yesterday on my envy at you being in the Bahamas. Well, we're here in freezing, it was down to 1 degree, 8 inches of snow and all that stuff. But hey, I won't complain about it much. So I hope that fits and makes sense for your question. And Miss Jeannie, you've got somebody with a hand up.
I do, but also there was a addition to that first question.
Okay.
They said, it's been amazing that so much has inspired so many more questions. This is another. Have you ever heard of this question? I was reading after Erico and began to see that I have done like those in the Near East do. And I like that culture, but I'm white. You know how the mind thinks. Telling me that reincarnation is real, I know it's not. But is it out of left field to say it's possible that there is a stored memory of sorts from ancient parents that were from that area or culture? There must be a reason why I pay attention to these things. I didn't ask for it. Looking on the inside really is fun, but always comes with more questions.
Yes,
so,
I'm with you. Go ahead. Excuse me, I thought you were finished speaking.
I was just going to say the ancestral memories, yes.
Absolutely. That's been well documented in science. There's no question. You go back to the ancient Aramaic, and what did it say? The sins of the fathers will be passed, yea, unto 3 and 4 generations. They're saying that if an energetic influence is put into the sperm or the egg, the development of the child is going to carry whatever the energies that are off the mark of the parents. It's pretty straightforward for sure. And what we can be sure of, I don't think anybody really understands how the energy system works at its very deepest levels. I know that over the years, and what I usually say to somebody, over the years of working with people, I've had people who have things come up that they accept or believe are past life memories. And there are other ways, I think, to explain memories like that, as in genetic memories, or it might just be the creative mind making something up in a way that you can deal with it. The bottom line is it doesn't really matter. And I've watched people who had what they considered to be a past life memory come forward, and when they dealt with it, when they applied forgiveness in that arena. In fact, well, let me give you an example. Years ago when I was working in Atlanta, there was an attorney who I knew through a friend, but this fellow was, his family had been attorneys in Atlanta for years, for decades, and he was a pretty highly successful man. And he was extremely intellectual. He was extremely atheist, and his heritage was Jewish. And through this person that we knew mutually, he ended up coming to me to do some private session work. Now, you got to know that a man who's living at that level, intellectual atheist, coming to see Michael Rice has got to be pretty strange. In any event, really nice guy, started to work with him, and we did some forgiveness work, and we did a still point session. And as he's breathing, he comes up with, all of a sudden he comes up with, I'm laying in a casket. I'm laying in a sarcophagus. This is what his mind is serving him. So, well, go with it. It's like, you know, if it seems like a past life memory, go with it and let's see what happens. So he goes through it, and I'm in a sarcophagus. Everybody that's here thinks I'm dead, and they're getting ready to bury me. And my wife is here, and she's with another man, and they're going to bury me and leave, and she's the only one that I'll be able to communicate with. If I can just communicate with her, she'll know I'm still alive, that I'm here. Don't bury me. And his language was, and you know, and she's getting ready to leave, and it's like, if she leaves, I'll die. So that was his experience. And then as the experience unfolded, the thing that led him to seek me out to do some private work was that he divorced this woman about 6 months earlier. Again, he was a pretty successful, high-level attorney in the city, very well known. And his life was totally and completely falling apart. His bank account had been emptied over this period of 6 months. He would just go into tremors and terror whenever or whenever he thought about her, or if he saw her, he would just totally break down. He just couldn't handle even the thought of her. And so I had him breathe, keep breathing, stay with this. And she leaves in this memory that's coming up, in this scenario that's coming up in his head. Again, it might just be a mind's creative way of serving up something that he can deal with. In any event, she leaves and he dies. Now here's a guy who's an atheist. And when he dies, he's still talking to me. And he tells me, you know, I just died. So I say to him, well, then who are you? I don't know, but I am. Several times I asked him the question, and he would just keep coming back with, I don't know, but I am. So he knew he existed beyond his physical form. So we finished the session, and I bid him to do, and he left my house, and within about a half a mile of the house was a gas station. He needed to stop and get some gas. He stopped to get gas, and he shared this with me in his next session. In his life, he had had 3 different important relationships. One was a high school sweetheart who he hadn't seen since high school, and at this point he's probably in his late 50s, early 60s. I don't know exactly his age, but something in that range, maybe a little younger, 45. So he left my house and he stopped to get gas, and he pulls up to the gas pumps, and filling her car up with gas is the girl he'd had a relationship with in high school that he hadn't seen since high school. And he had a pleasant, sweet exchange with her and went on, and it was his day. He had taken the day out of the office. It was his day to go and be with his kids. He described his daughter as hating him and lamented that he had not even touched his son since he was an infant. But he was going to pick them up and take them out for dinner. It was his evening to have them. And this was, these were 2 children that he'd had with a woman that was his first marriage. They had divorced about 10 years earlier. She had custody of the kids, and he would visit them. He said in the 10 years they'd been divorced, she had not had a decent word to say to him in 10 years. And when he got to her house to pick up the kids, she waved him in, invited him in, And the first decent words she'd said to him in 10 years, she expressed, hey, everything's really all right, and gave him a warm and loving kiss on the cheek. Took the kids and off they go. So now he's seen 2 out of the 3 women that were important in his life in terms of relationship. He took the kids to the mall, they had dinner, and as I forget whether it was when they were leaving the mall or as they got to the mall, the woman who he had divorced, or had divorced him actually 6 months earlier, was there. Now previously, he could not think about her, could not speak about her, and certainly couldn't see her without literally, totally and completely emotionally falling apart. He saw her at the mall, was able to say hello, give her just a quick hug and say, hey, hope everything's okay, and carry on. No deleterious impact whatsoever. So that's all within a matter of 5 hours of doing this session, where he experienced himself dying, and knowing that if the woman who was his wife, by the way, in his mind, it was the woman who had divorced him 6 months earlier, and his thought was, if she leaves, I'll die. And he literally, the time they divorced, was pretty much in the process of dying. I mean, everything was falling apart. He actually became really engaged in the work. I had a study group and would invite different students to present, and he actually came and presented a lesson in a study group that I had. And he also, when he came to do that, and it was just a matter of a couple of months later, he shared with the group, kind of shared the story with them, and that his practice was back on track. His bank account had refilled, and his life was just totally smoothed out. Everything was cool. So that's how his mind presented. Again, I'm not saying that it is a past life. Might be a genetic memory. Might be the mind's creative way of making up. Go ahead, sweetie.
And tell about his kids.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I forgot about that piece. Yes. When they got back from the dinner in the mall and you dropped them off at their mom's place, his daughter, who previous to this, in our session, he had shared that his daughter hated him. I believe she was about 15. And she asked if she and her boyfriend could come over the next week and cook dinner for him. And his son, who he said he had not touched since he was an infant, he said his son grabbed a hold of him and just hugged him as though he was never going to let him go. That's within 6 or 7 hours of doing a still point session where he touched into what he considered to be a past life memory. When, of course, he didn't believe in past lives, but that's how it came up. And it was just so, we don't need to question it, we don't have to figure it out, it doesn't matter. Maybe his mind made the whole thing up so that he could deal with this separation and belief that without this woman, he would die. And the impact that had on everything in his life. So yes, and many questions come up. I know that I was talking to someone this morning, and I personally went with, as you say, the deeper you go, the more questions there are. At this point, with a number of different arenas that I wish to still integrate into this work and the depth at which they need to be integrated and the expansion of how we're bringing this forward in the world, I could literally use, let's say, something in the range of about 90 hours a day to take in and research and question and go to experts of all of the things that I'm realizing I don't have a clue about that I want to or need to know. So yeah, it's, and when you think about it, if we look at that Harvard research that we talked about, again, what they showed was that in a time frame where they could measure 10,000 units of electrical activity happening in the brain, the max amount of data that goes into conscious awareness is 9 bits. That's all that the mind of man, that's all that perception can do, is serve up 9 bits of data. It's been estimated in the same time frame that the actuality contains perhaps 20 trillion bits of data. So if we live in an actuality that is 20 trillion bits of data, with a mind that can move 10,000 brain cells and perception that can only encompass 9 bits of that, then you can certainly imagine that working through a 9-bit mind, if you're going to comprehend a 20 trillion bit world, and or, you know, you look at what science is now telling us, this latest Webb telescope is, I mean, the Big Bang is gone. That's now been proven to be another fantasy that perception made up. And we're seeing galaxies and stars that are, you know, the universe is an unfathomable expanse, larger than what the unfathomable expanse was we thought it was. And my take is that as beings, we are upgrading our awareness as beings to literally be able to comprehend all of that, work within that, and be the next step in the creation process. You know, if you go back and listen to the creation story in Aramaic, and then you hear the Creator after creation occurs giving instructions to humans. It says, go forth and multiply and replenish the face of the earth. Most everybody listened to the multiply command. They liked that one, but had no idea what replenish meant. But in Aramaic, what that term meant was the Creator was instructing us to bring the creation to completion. It's like you and I are the next step in the creation, and it's up to us to utilize our higher faculties to turn away from carbon-based memory. You know, when the word repent isn't the repent ye sinner for the end is coming. Repent in the pensée in French is to think, is to rethink, and that means that rather than being focused in this 9-bit mind, rather than being focused in perception, the mind of man, that literally, imagine you've got somebody looking, you know, a being looking into its own mind. It's looking into the top of the head, and then there's the whole creation behind them. To repent in that sense, if you get that visual, would be literally to turn away from what's happening in carbon-based memory, the mind of man, and turn toward, like 180 degrees, and turn toward what's waiting to come through, so that we can be the instrument that brings the creation to the next level. And who knows what that's going to look like. We're going to have to get finished with war and drama and trauma and hatred and racism and vengeance and violence. We're going to have to get rid of that before we're going to start to see, before we can get a mass critical mass, as Yeshua said it, when he says a little leavening leavens the whole loaf. He's talking about physics, and that each one who engages in this process we're talking about and finally incarnates into their own physiology, the active presence of love, because everything that would inhibit the active presence of love in their physiology has been forgiven. When enough people incarnate fully as love in this world, in their forms, then together we create literally a critical mass energy that shifts and changes every mind on the planet. It will create such a bright light that everybody will turn toward it. And it will be like, you know, I think a good example would be like the sun would warm us and would be embraced, because the opening is there when enough people have done the work. Enough people who are the cutting edge of incarnating as human beings, rather than functioning out of a picture in the mind of who we thought we were, the ego. You know, when Yeshua says, in order for you to live, you've got to die. In order to incarnate as a human being, in order to actually enter into this world as who you are, as love, you're going to have to stop the belief that you're whatever your power person told you, whatever the culture told you, you know, the crazies. Going to have to eradicate sin, those energies that are off the mark, and step back into functioning as, truly functioning as a human being, which is nothing other than the active presence of love. So that would be my offering. Hope it fits and makes sense. Any other thoughts for you, sweetie?
Two things, and then we do have 2 callers. The first one
Great.
is Erico's site is noohra.com. And I'm putting a link to that in the web.
I wasn't sure if it was org or com. Okay, yeah. Great.
And the Lamsa Bible was published in 1933. And someone had
33,
asked,
okay.
did anybody, someone asked, did anybody use it? It is being used by the Assyrian Church of the East and other Syriac traditions. It's actively their Bible there.
The introduction and such is really juicy and excellent, as are all of the commentaries. But the reason I suggest the commentaries, again, when you take the whole text of the Old and New Testament, which he's done both, when you take that whole text and you recognize there should have been approximately 10 to 12,000 changes, and there were only about 16 or 1,700, I think you have to read a lot to find one of the morsels. And if you get one of the commentaries instead, you'll have, morsel after morsel, page after page after page, in terms of understanding the nuances of the Aramaic. I can hear you talking, Jeannie, but your voice has disappeared.
Oh, because I had muted.
Oh, there you go. That old mute challenge thing.
Yeah. So we actually have 3 callers. But the first one, I don't know this person. It's area code 614. You are on the air. How are you, and who are you? And welcome.
Hi, thank you. I'm Kathleen.
Welcome.
I'm in Columbus, Ohio.
Hi, Kathleen.
Hi.
Awesome.
And,
delight to meet you.
Yeah. Yes. I have a couple questions for you. I listened to your talk with Suzanne Tucker a couple evenings ago, and
right.
you mentioned that the person that causes us injury also has the salve, and I was wondering if you could give an example of that. And my second burning question is from yesterday's talk. You spoke about goals, which was really super helpful and shifting for me. And I was wondering if you could share, how do we use goals in a healthy way that's aligned with our true self, so we don't get in a niche again?
Right. Okay, let's start with that one, because that's fresh with what we talked about yesterday. So the idea is to recognize that what we call the mind of man, which would be like our database. You go to your computer, comparable, you type a question into the database, into the computer, and it gives you an answer. So typing something into the computer would be like setting a goal. And let's say I take the computer and I type 20 different commands in at one time. If I could do that, theoretically, if I could do that, the computer would become, overloaded, overwhelmed, and perhaps crash. In exactly the same way, and the instruction that Yeshua was giving in that case is, sufficient for the day are the evils thereof. Again, evil being unripe in that context, being incomplete. So, in other words, only set goals, frame and set goals for what you will be able to accomplish in the next waking hour. If you set more goals than that, you're going to overwhelm and overload your mind, the same way as typing 10 different commands into the computer at the same time would cause it to crash. The mind kind of crashes. And so we actually have, if you go to our website, whyagain.org, we have a worksheet there called Mind Goal Management. And the Mind Goal Management sheet goes hand in hand with a workshop called Getting the Stress You Need. Stress has been given a bad rap in our culture, like there's something wrong with it. But actually, the only behaviors that are ever done are done in response to stress. Stress is absolutely our best friend. However, if we don't know how to manage our minds, and we create an overwhelm of stress, I went to the latest mind goal, or the latest goal setting workshop, and I came out of there and they told me to set my hourly goals and my daily goals for the week, and my weekly goals, and then my goal for next month, and the next month, and the next month, and the next, and then for the next year, and then for the next 5 years, and I wondered why I came out so overwhelmed with stress. Because every time you set a goal, you create a stress, which is wonderful. Because a goal is typing a command into the computer that says, gee, I need to write email, open the email program. Computer, now my email program is open, and I write my email. When I frame a goal and set that goal, I'm saying to my mind, this is the task that I want you to do now. Give me the best information you've got for how to do this. And if I have, a whole lifetime of goals locked in there, and genetically I have unresolved goals, if you think about what your generation, the generation, before you and I, our parents, their parents, their parents, their parents, how many goals do you suppose, let's just look at 3 or 4 generations, our parents set that were never accomplished and left them in perhaps frustration, pain, rage, guilt, who knows, the goal to make sure that, this family works perfectly and it doesn't work perfectly, so now I'm guilty, and then I've got a church that tells me that I'm to blame and I'm guilty because I sin, all of those things. So it is the setting of a goal that creates stress, which is wonderful, but if you overload the whole system, like the computer, your mind crashes. So the Mind Goal Management Sheet is a worksheet for doing morning exercise and an evening exercise around goals and getting into the habit of managing your mind so that it gives you what you want. And the mind is managed through indirection. You'll notice if, let's say, we all know somebody who were really great at quitting smoking. They'd done it 100 times. And they tried to quit smoking by saying to their mind, we are going to quit smoking. But not many people do that because the mind is managed through indirection. And an example of indirection would be, let's say, I imagine, are you in St. Louis?
I'm in Columbus, Ohio.
Columbus. Oh, okay, right. So
I grew up
imagine
in St.
Columbus,
Louis.
right? Okay, I imagine Columbus is probably about as chilly or maybe a little chillier than we are here today. I think it's about 20 or so.
Yeah.
So imagine that the house is getting cold because the temperature just dropped 20 degrees, and I yell out, furnace, turn on. It's cold in here. Is the furnace going to turn on? We're almost at the point where we've got the technology where that will happen, but most of us don't have that technology. If I want the house to warm up because it's getting cold, what do? I go over and turn up the thermostat. That's managing the furnace through indirection. I can't do it directly. There's a tool with which I have to do it. The mind's the same way. The tool for managing the mind is goals. Goals create stress. Stress is a prompt to the mind to come up with the best information it has to guide you as to how to achieve that goal. And then realize that there are only 2 ways to get rid of a goal. One is it either needs to be accomplished, or 2, it needs to be canceled. In our Getting the Stress You Need workshop, I do a meditation, and we go back and we literally have people going back and asking to be shown what kind of goals they had for mom when they were 2 or 3 or 4 years old that were never achieved. How many times did they call for dad to be there when dad was at work and the goal was never achieved? Well, those goals, not having been canceled, are still in the mind of the person at 90. And people say, I don't know why I'm frustrated. Well, here it is. Those accumulated goals load the mind with stress, and that stress is what leads people to function out of hostility and fear. So going back and cleaning up the goals, part of the Mind Goal Management Worksheet, every night before sleep, I ask help of what in Aramaic was called Ruka Dekucha. The Greeks call it the Holy Spirit. It's got nothing to do with the disembodied spirit being, but inside of each of us, what Yeshua identified was a power that was called Ruka Dekucha. And Ruka Dekucha is not a disembodied spirit being again, but rather is a feminine elemental force in us that does 2 things, as he identified it. It undoes the effects of our errors, and it teaches us the truth, if we know she's there. And so inviting that power to show us, and go back and literally every night before you sleep, clean out every goal from any time in your life. Then you get to go to sleep stress-free. The only goal you have for sleep is deep, restful, regenerative sleep, where if you're working on something, you ask Ruka, for feedback and guidance. Now, sleep happens, and guidance comes, and then in the morning, the goals that you framed the night before, you set, and you purposely initiate a stress, and then rock on with your day. You get close to the end of the day, and there are 3 things on the list. Well, I'll just leave them there for tomorrow. So now what you just said is, so these 3 things that I didn't get accomplished today, I'm going to leave those stresses in my mind while I try to sleep. Anybody ever go to sleep and the mind's going down, 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 down? Why is it doing that? Because you gave it an assignment and it's just doing what it was told. Cancel the assignment, cancel the goal, forgive, and the mind shuts up. You go to sleep.
That is so helpful. Oh my gosh, I'm dumbfounded. That is so incredible. How does that
technology
fit in
has
with...
been around for 2,000 years.
Yeah.
That comes out of Yeshua's mouth 2,000 years ago in Aramaic. But if you listen to Greek, sufficient for the day are the evils thereof, you go, what the heck does that mean?
Yeah. How does this work with planning, like business planning?
I have a planner.
Anything?
If I've got something, like Jeannie, do you want to share your school example? It's a great one.
Okay. When I went back to school, I, in my mind, decided that I was going to complete my 4-year degree in 3.5 years, and I did. But
well, we were on the road full time.
Right. A lot of times Michael would be up there doing a workshop, and I'd be in the back writing my papers or taking my quiz or whatever. But anyway, but when I signed up for school, I signed up for my first class and ordered the books for that first class. There was no need of me even considering, okay, I'm taking Psychology 101. What am I going to do for Psychology 605? That's how many classes away. There's nothing I can do about it right now. So I had in my planner, it was a fast track class that was 5 weeks for each class, and one right behind the other. And so I put down, this is the class that I'm going to do this first 5 weeks. And then I wrote in my planner, I'm still one of those that carries a paper calendar, and I put down, then in 5 weeks I'm going to sign up for my second class and order the books for it. But there's no need of me doing that until I get to the week before that class. And so it went in my planner so that I would remember to do it, but I only set goals for what I could do in the next waking period. And then there again, each class being 5 weeks, by the time I reached the 5th week, I had to have an essay of that whole 5 weeks. Well, I'd start out and I'd say, okay, well, to accomplish that, this week I have to do my rough outline of what I'm going to write about. Then week 2, a little bit more polished outline. Week 3, my rough draft written up. Then week 4, I'll get it, have it edited or whatever. And then week 5, I'll submit my final paper. But I couldn't worry about my final paper that was going to be week 5 when I hadn't even done, my ideas or my outline in week 1. So you can put things in your planner, this is what I have to do during this week or on this day, but you don't set it as a goal until you get to it.
Okay, so it's kind of like a tentative plan, but you don't attach to it. You let it go until the time's right.
The difference between a plan and a goal is a commitment that I'm going to finish this in the next 24 hours. A plan, Jeannie had a plan to graduate in 3.5 years. And so each week she would do whatever it was that she was committed to doing to ultimately achieve the completion of that plan. But the goal to graduate in 3.5 years would do nothing but leave a stress that would use resources, relegate it to the planner, and then frame and set your goals on a daily basis so that you live stress-free, have all your resources available, all your vitality available, and aren't, peddling under the surface trying to accomplish something that you can't accomplish in this particular waking period. And that way you have your multi-generational database called your body-mind unit, the mind of man, available to you for its purpose. That is, being your servant, your footstool, and giving you the information that you need for what you choose to accomplish in the world today. And for you to stretch your sleep and tomorrow. And
so the plan is like a map, a general map, and then
yes,
the goals are what you commit to on a daily basis. And it sounds like you're saying, try not to set a goal unless you're going to do it within the next hour.
What would be the next waking period? So on the Mind Goal Management sheet that we have, that's on the website, you can download it from whyagain.org. If you download that, there's a morning section and an evening section. So in the evening, you cancel the goals from yesterday and all of the rest of your life, anything that you can have come to the surface. So you clear that out, and then you frame the goals that you're thinking you're going to achieve tomorrow. You don't set them because you don't want to go to bed with that stress, but you frame them, and you're asking Ruka for feedback on those things. Are they appropriate? In the morning, you check them off. Do I still like this goal? Is this really in alignment with my purpose? And then I make a commitment. Yes, I'm committing to this goal. I'm going to achieve this. Now your mind is clear to give you the best guidance and the best intelligence possible to achieve your goal. Whereas people who don't know any better end up creating all kinds of stress and all kinds of interference in their minds that slow them down. So it makes one much more efficient at everything.
Wow, that's really beautiful. Yeah. How does intention weave in with goals and plans?
Well, that's a great question that fits perfectly with where we're heading with all of this. That's an important piece of the puzzle. And actually, it involves a question that Yeshua was asked 2,000 years ago and that he answered. And they said to him, you might remember a passage where they said to him, come across very clearly, or at least the answer doesn't come across at all in the Greek, but they say what? They speak about the law in this question. The law, just about every important word in Yeshua's teachings was turned backward by the Greek. So the word law in our culture today, most people I would think would probably agree that law is the rule of a superior. If you think of quote-unquote God's laws, well, there's a superior somewhere up there in the cloud that says you better do it this way or else you're in trouble. That's a totally Greek idea. Yeshua would not relate to that at all. That's all Greek to me, he would say. Law is simply the way it works. So they ask him, in essence, so I'm a human being, what's the first law? What do I need to do to function as a human being? We're told in the Greek translations that he said you've got to love God, love your neighbor as yourself. And that's just not even relative to what he said, not even close to his Aramaic words. And it turns the word love on its head because the word love represents a state of human life. It represents our created essence as well as representing the Creator. And, we each came into the world as the active presence of love. And one of the first questions that Jeannie or I will ask in our main workshop when we're traveling, which we're not doing anymore, but in our intensives, is we'll ask the question, have you ever held a newborn child? Have you ever held a newborn?
Yes.
If you went back to the moment where you held your first newborn and you tapped into the essence of your newborn, what word would you use to describe the essence of that newborn?
Just pure beingness and peace.
So this is a question we've asked of tens of thousands of people in all kinds of cultures all over the globe, and everybody agrees. The words they use are always some variation on the theme of love, that the newborn is the presence of love. And then we'll ask people, so tap in now to that presence, that being, and tell me, is that newborn loving you, or is that newborn love?
It's love.
No question. So love is a noun. Love describes a state of being, as you said it, pure beingness. We all come into the world exactly the same, and we have a culture that specializes in beating the awareness out of us that we are love. And then, at a certain age, they send us out the door to find somebody to love us, or find somebody to love. And now, when you realize the mind is designed to accomplish goals, you just gave the mind of that person a fantasy that is not achievable.
Wow.
No one has ever loved you. No one ever will love you. You have never loved anyone. God does not love you. Love isn't a verb. It's not something we do. It's what we are. But if I set a goal to love you, and just look around the world, what is everybody who says, oh, I love them so much and then I fell out of love with them, if you ask them, when was the moment you fell out of love? Oh, it was when they didn't do what I wanted them to do. Oh, you mean they didn't fulfill your goals? So what you're really telling me is what you call love is approval. As long as you're doing everything I want you to do, I love you. But by God, if you stop doing what I want you to do. And we project that onto the Creator. We stopped doing what the Creator wanted us to do, so now the Creator stopped loving us. And therefore is going to punish. I mean, the whole thing is just a crazy Greek fantasy on its face. Love is a state of being. It's what we are. And the whole idea of this work is to return to the acting as the presence of love. So how do we do that? They asked Yeshua, how do we do that? That's a great idea. How do we do that? He said in Aramaic, when you think of the Creator, when you think of neighbor, you must have a condition in your mind called Rachma, active. And if you do that, you will maintain awareness of yourself as love. Not love God, love your neighbor as yourself, as the Greeks would tell us. Rachma is a filter in the frontal lobes of the brain. It's interesting, for a year I traveled with the Kaboris manuscript. We were working on getting high-resolution images, and I traveled to several different places. I used to sleep with it every night under my bed. It was actually pretty cool to hang out with that manuscript, and it went back to the 10th century. But there was a community in Southern California that spoke Aramaic, native Aramaic speakers. And we connected with that community when I was out in California, and we took the manuscript to them, and one of the things we asked was, because we were working on and didn't, this was a difficult word. What does this Rachma mean? And what they said is, we have lost the meaning of that word. We don't know what it means. But what our tradition tells us is that it is the most precious jewel that you could have. So the Aramaic, this particular community, at least, I don't know if that's common across the world of Aramaic-speaking communities, but this community in particular said it was the most precious jewel, but we don't know exactly what it means. And over years of working with this, what we finally came to understand that Rachma, which is a word he used, is what you had to have when you thought of Creator and neighbor, and by doing that you would maintain self. Rachma is a filter in the frontal lobes of the brain. Medicine, and I haven't established this, but there's a thing called the angular gyrus that's become associated with love. I suspect that Rachma is the location of the angular gyrus. Again, I haven't been able to prove that one scientifically, but I think that's what it is. And what the researchers are saying is when that's active, that's when love is present. That's when the system lights up. So he said you must have Rahma when you think of the creator and neighbor. In other words, you've got to have this filter active. It's a twofold thing, Rahma. It's a filter in the frontal lobes of the brain, and it's a gateway which allows human life, created essence love, to enter and be active in the human form. People think that if you've got a human form, you've got a human being. My offering is that's totally, completely false. A human form is not a human being. It's not a human life. There has to be active love there for there to be a human life there. And there's only an active life there if Rahma is active and open, the gateway through which love enters the human form. You know, if you've ever observed, there are some people and you go, is there any humanity in there at all? Because hostility and fear override that. So it's a gateway, and then the second function is it's a filter. And it's a filter over intentions. Frontal lobes of the brain, intentions are stored. And that filter, when active, allows only intentions that are keyed to love to be available in the mind as raw material for goals. So intentions are the raw material of goals. Dan McDougald, who was my partner in the Kaburis project, and we co-created the course called Laws of Living for the Prisons, which we've adapted now to the general population. But Dan, and I have a picture of him sitting here at the other side of the room, and I often, although he left his body many years ago, I often say hello to him and ask his support and guidance. But one of Dan's favorite sayings, which I've adopted and use often, was that an intention can no more move a muscle than a shadow can carry a stone. Shadow looks like it's got substance, and gee, it should be able to go over there and pick up that rock, right? Possible. Intentions do nothing. I know there are people out there writing books about the power of intentions. An intention is only a piece of raw material to be utilized by the mind or by the being in selecting what goals are going to be activated in the mind. And what Rahma does is it filters out negative and destructive goals, intentions. It filters out negative and destructive intentions so that only intentions keyed to love become available for use by the mind as raw material for goals. So Rahma keeps the frontal lobes of the brain on track, and then there's a corresponding filter in the back of the brain over perception. In Aramaic, that was called Kuba. And Kuba is a filter over perception that does the same thing as Rahma does over intentions. It allows the mind to only use intent or perceptual memory that is keyed to love in building your guidance, your perception. So Rahma and Kuba together were called perfect love. And you remember they said perfect love casts out fear. The mind cannot generate, it doesn't matter what they're facing. You could be facing the most tragic, threatening, life-destroying situation the world could ever offer. If Rahma, and you think about the saints and what they were able to do, this makes sense now. If Rahma and Kuba are set, then love is present in the mind, and the mind cannot create a perception based in hostility or fear. It can only create perceptions based in love. And so it allows us to fully incarnate as human beings when those two filters are active. And they're interdependent, connected filters. When I like to think about that old song, love and marriage go together like a horse and carriage. You can't have one, you can't have none, you can't have one without the other. Well, you can't have Rachma without Kuba and vice versa. It starts with Rachma, you set that, Kuba falls into place, and this is a practice we suggest people use, inviting and asking Ruka for support and bring these filters into activity, because if one fails, it's not going to be long before the other one collapses. And we've been trained, by the world, hostility and fear, kind of like that's what keeps you safe, right? Well, no, actually, it's what destroys life.
Yeah. Wow. That is
the technology
so
of the mind that Yeshua had 2,000 years ago. I mean, they talk about, these old fogies in the desert. What did they know? The technology of the mind that he had 2,000 years ago would boggle the mind of any psychiatrist on the planet. And the beauty of it is, you don't have to believe a word of it. Just test it out. It works. That's all. It just works. You don't have to believe it. You just take it and try it out.
Yeah, it's very scientific.
It's absolutely awesome and testable. And I know you started out with another question as well, so perhaps tomorrow we can begin with that question, because the radio show just spoke in my ear and said, pardon me, Monday, yes, today's Friday, isn't it? Said that we're complete, so it's going to cut us off any second.
Okay,
but
thank you so much.
I appreciate the questions and the opportunity to put this information into the